The GST, or the Goods and Service Tax, came into being in a midnight session of Parliament 4 years ago. This session in 2017 promised to herald a new regime. In fact, back in those days, the GST was expected to do a whole host of things, from increasing perhaps 1 or 2% to the GDP, simplifying a very complicated tax structure, making things cheaper, making ease of business better, you name it, and it was hoped that the GST would fulfill it. 4 years down the line, and in its 5th year, has the GST truly lived up to the expectation of being a good and simple tax as was touted? To speak more on this, I'm joined now by a very special panel of speakers. We've tried to keep every aspect of the stakeholders of the GST in this conversation. So pleased to welcome PTR Thiagarajan, the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu. Let me begin with your take, Mr. Thiagarajan, on how you look at the GST Council and what is happening right now. You have, in the recent past, commented on how you think there's time for a change, that there needs to be more back and forth of exchange. As a relatively new Finance Minister of the state of Tamil Nadu, how do you find the platform of the GST Council, and what is your view on its completion of 4 years?
Let me just say maybe one more thing. In 2017, before the law was passed, a friend of mine, Praveen Chakravarti, and I wrote a piece in the Mint newspaper, and we said our concern primarily is about the loss of ability of states to generate revenues as per their government's wishes. This lack of freedom in a country that's already hugely centralized, more so than almost any other country in the world, certainly any other large country in the world. What are we giving up? There's all these upsides promised, but what are we giving up? So if I start from that perspective, I would say a point like this for reflection, it shows me, A, that we have really lost all the things we thought we were going to lose, and realized complexities that we didn't expect to realize in terms of executional problems and kind of operational problems and decision-making trouble. And the reverse is that the promised benefits have been hard to find. And neither have we seen buoyancy in taxes, nor have we seen any great ease of doing business, nor have we really seen a fundamental transformation in the volume of commerce that ease of doing business is supposed to produce in terms of increased transactions. So I think that's the basis on which I said, though I'm a relative newcomer, it's a good point to take stock. We are in a crisis. We have seen the consequences of the current system during that crisis. And my worry is that if we don't take a fundamental retooling approach now, that the longer we wait, the more these, by default outcomes become crystallized as if they were rules or norms. And it will be much harder to change in the future. So that would be my comprehensive take on that.
Let's come back to the basic issue of, is it half done going forward? Ms. Thiagarajan, what would you like to see changing? You talked about retooling the GST right now. You're talking from the state's perspective. Right now, opposition states are conveying that they are not feeling included, that their voice is not heard. Apart from that, do you still think that there's merit in going back to the earlier system so that a state can tax more? Isn't this, in a sense, simplifying the process?
So this notion that somehow this is increasing tax sovereignty is mind-boggling to me. Right? 100% of direct taxation power lies with the union government. All we had was indirect taxation power. Now that has also been taken away from us. It is not my fault if the union happens to decide not to do anything about its direct taxation power, decides to cut down its progressive taxation and make it more unfair by going to indirect taxation. These are not things that are within our control. In the Constitution, 100% of direct taxation lies with the union. In any reasonable tax country, you must take progressive taxation like direct taxation, which is 60% of all taxation. 60% of all taxation power lies with the union. Only 40% was with me. Now that also is gone. We have these classic case studies that we pointed out, that when Mr. MGR, who's not even my party, who's opposition party, decided to do a free noon meal scheme for every student in every school, the way he funded it was by raising the sales tax by 1%. I don't have that luxury anymore. What if I decide I want to give free health for everybody and raise another 10,000 crores? I don't have the luxury anymore. I'm a relatively well-to-do state. So there are many, many issues here. The biggest issue of which is that those states like us and Maharashtra and Karnataka and Gujarat and maybe even Chhattisgarh, Mr. Singh, they will tell us, who are not that dependent. We are huge net contributors of taxes to the union. If we pay a rupee in taxes, the average Tamilian gets back 30 or 35 paisa. 75% of our budget is state-owned revenues, and we only get 25% from the union. We are upset. We have lost our rights. We have lost our independence. Right? Now, those states which get 50, 70, 80, 90% of their budgets from the union may feel they have nothing to start with anyway. So they say, no problem. We have not lost anything. We have gained sovereignty. Maybe we have lost. Let's be very clear about that. Number two, I don't understand what country Mr. Money lives in if he says that cesses are a small part of what? 23% of the union government's revenues come from cesses. It used to be below 10% in the UPA. So 23% of the total revenues are not divisible to the states. They are being expropriated into an indivisible pool. How is that fair to us? So we have fundamental problems with the notion of fairness, with the direction of taxation, and with the ratio of indirect regressive taxes to direct progressive taxes. We are now, let me put it simply, we are being dragged down to the lowest common denominator of an inefficient and ill-formed system. Now you come to the actual GST Council. I was not there. I didn't have the luxury of being a representative when Mr. Jaitley was there. But I can tell you now that the debates are not actually very clear at all. Who has what authority? What item should come for approval? What item should come for ratification? What item should come for information? 72 rate-setting decisions were made by effectively IAS officers in a fitment committee, and were told that we were being told that it's for information. So naturally, finance ministers of certain states said, how are we then, what are we here for? Why were we elected by the people? Why did we come to this council? And this council, incidentally, is only a advisory body. Let's say that we all agree that something is going to happen in the council. It doesn't become law overnight. We have to go back. The parliament has to pass a bill. We have to come back and amend the Tamil Nadu commercial tax bill or the tax law. Only then it becomes execution, because democracy is still democracy. Elected representatives have to go through a process, right? You cannot have a bunch of people sit there. Now the question is which people? Is it even elected members who are ministers, or is it IAS officers who sit in a subcommittee? So my fundamental question, and it's on a document that was sent to all states, is we are not even clear which powers reside with whom, how they should be exercised, and how they come to fruition. Why don't we start with cleaning that up first?
Mr. Tyagarajan, just on the question of bringing fuel into the ambit of GST, fuel and alcohol was kept out. Would you be agreeable to that? It is something which will give some comfort to the common man. 105 rupees, I think, is the price of petrol in Mumbai today. It is, no one is ready to budge, nor are states, nor is centre. What is your view on this?
My views are very clear, but let me just go back a second. I'm not somehow combative in saying everything is wrong. There's nothing in which everything is wrong. There's nothing in which everything is right. Everything is a trade. So I don't have a problem with the notion that GST was run for a good reason and it has yielded some benefits. Of course, nothing is ever all bad. The points that I was making was that everything happens in a milieu, in an environment. I don't get to make decisions as a minister for my state only on one item. As Mr. Singh said, our job is to raise enough revenues. I mean, I'm even more quantitative than that. I say I want 10.5% of the GSDP as the state's own revenues, and whatever we used to get was 4% of our GSDP from the center or the union. Now we get down 3. It's okay. Okay, we can make that up. We're a big state. We have big manufacturing, all that. But the fundamental problem is in the kind of execution. And I agree clearly with my colleague from J&K that execution is everything. You and I might have slight differences of opinion or even vast differences of opinion, but if your opinion and your view executes in such a way that we don't have a problem, I can actually live with that. What we have now is an execution problem where we are all seeing a drop in revenues and we are seeing operational complexity. Let's just take the compensation cess for the GST. Just one example. The compensation cess for the GST, the CAG reports actually carried a net positive for the first 2 years. From 17-18 and 18-19, it had an excess of 40-something thousand crores, almost 50,000 crores of excess collection on the cess compared to the compensation that needed to be paid out. But what happened? Much like many of the other cesses that the union government sets, like for Swachh Bharat and Krishi Kalyan and this, that, and everything else, after not spending the money for the purpose it was designated to, and not carrying it over to the next year should there be an excess demand compared to collection, they absorb them back into the union revenues without actually redividing them after bringing them back. So you call it a cess, it's supposed to be earmarked for a purpose, you don't use it for that purpose, and then you actually absorb it back and don't share it on the reabsorption. Now you have a problem where the rule seems to work in your favor. Whenever it suits you, it's black, and whenever it suits you, it's white. Because sure enough, when the time comes when compensation is due, incidentally, this compensation system is badly designed if you're looking at macro risk. It is fundamentally badly designed. The only time states are going to need payouts to make up to 14% is if the entire system is actually in funk, in the economy as such. Now, if you have idiosyncratic risk that one state had a disaster or one state had a problem, then the system works fine. But when you have a macro problem, of course, when the economy of India is down, then the economy of every state is down. That's only when we need compensation. If it wasn't so, then why was there surplus in the first 2 years? So you have a system that's itself badly designed, then the execution goes even worse than that. So I'm completely clear that we should going back to your question, why would, and then just to make the numbers very clear, as of today, of the 32 rupees and 90 paisa that the union government levies as taxes on petrol, 31 rupees and 67 paisa is in cess, and only 1 rupee and 38 paisa, 1 rupee 40 paisa, I may be wrong by 5 or 10 paisa, is in excise, right? So at some level, these taxes are not being shared. Or that was not true back in 2014 when the UPA finished. It was about 6 rupees something in excise and 3 rupees something or 2 rupees something in cess. So the ratio of excise to cess has completely changed. It's like 4% to 6% excise and 94 to 96% cess, which the union takes and retains.
Right.
And that's especially after this Feb 21 budget. So if I put all of this together, and the fact that the union through GSTN even collects the SGST and then sends it to us when they feel like it, I would be loath to put any product into the GST framework under the current operational model that we have in terms of who actually collects it, where is the point of kind of delivery, on what date is it physically transmitted to us, why is SGST collected by GSTN and transmitted at some date of their choosing, why is it not being collected directly by us? These are all practical operational questions that I have concerns about.
Okay, so there is a lot of, I wouldn't say acrimony, but a lot of questions to go through. The GST Council has its task cut out for it. GST is not going to have an easy time ahead, and the last 4 years hasn't been easy either for the new regime. A lot of twists and turns and changes, working on it on the fly, and that will possibly continue. But yes, it has been a landmark change in the way India taxes. There's no doubt about it. We also must talk about here how Arun Jaitley, the late Mr. Arun Jaitley, made this happen and made center and states come together. Can that process of federalism and cooperation continue is the biggest question of all. I want to thank all of you for joining us on this special coverage this evening.
Thank you.